Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, honestly, we are about to unpack a monumental shift in human thought. We're going to dive deep into the epic battle between two massive, world-altering philosophies, structuralism and post-structuralism. Now, if you've ever wondered why some people firmly believe in absolute universal rules of culture, while others argue that literally nothing is stable and everything is entirely subjective, well, you are in the exact right place. Today's explainer is going to fundamentally alter how you read, interpret, and understand the world around you.
So here's our roadmap for today's deep dive. We'll hit 1. The quest for order. 2. Meaning and the syntech. 3. Death of the author. 4. Dismantling the binaries. And finally, 5. The end of certainty.
All right, Section 1, the quest for order. Structuralism versus post-structuralism. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right into this foundational tension, this battle between building a massive system up and tearing it entirely down. To really understand this debate, we have to start with structuralism. Now, think of this philosophy as a highly comforting, rule-bound universe. It is completely dedicated to uncovering stable, universal systems that underlie all texts and all cultures. It treats meaning as something that is entirely knowable, entirely systematic. Basically, if you were a structuralist, you believed that human culture and language were like a sturdy architectural blueprint. The idea is that if you just look hard enough, you can find the master system governing the whole shebang. Everything has a place, and everything makes sense. But then, boom, along comes the ultimate disruptor, post-structuralism. This philosophy completely rejects all of that certainty. It argues that meaning isn't stable at all. Rather, it's highly unstable, contradictory, and endlessly deferred. So where structuralism works so hard to build this objective, comforting house, post-structuralism basically shows up with a sledgehammer to smash the illusion. They look at those architectural blueprints we just talked about and say, yeah, they're completely made up. Moving on to Section 2, meaning and the sign, the building blocks. So when we look at the very basic building blocks of language, specifically how we define meaning, the divide between these two camps is massive. Structuralism argues that meaning is relational, right? Like, we know what hot is only because it relates to cold. But crucially, for them, it remains stable within the overall system. It's locked in place. Post-structuralism, however, completely disagrees. They argue meaning is never fixed. It is always deferred, always sliding away from us. You know when you try to define a really complex feeling and you find the words just aren't quite right? That is the ultimate post-structuralist vibe. Just when you think you've pinned a text down, it slips right through your fingers. Let's look closer at that. Take a spoken word, what linguists call this signifier, and then the concept that word creates in your head, the signified. Structuralists firmly believe these two components are glued together by stable, reliable convention. But then, philosopher Jacques Derrida threw a massive wrench into this whole machine. Derrida argued that the signified concept in your head is actually just another signifier in disguise. For post-structuralists, no final anchor exists anywhere. Every time you try to define a word, you literally just have to use more words. It takes this solid, anchored structure and turns it into an endless, dizzying hall of mirrors. Ultimately, structuralists view language as a closed, beautifully self-sufficient system that functions almost like math. Post-structuralists look at that exact same language and see a chaotic tornado. To them, language is inherently unstable, riddled with traces of other meanings, glaring absences, and irresolvable contradictions. That comforting, closed linguistic system, completely shattered. Which brings us to Section 3. Death of the author. Who actually holds the power? I want you to think for a second about how you consume media. When you read a book or watch a movie, do you actually care what the creator originally intended, or does your own interpretation matter more? Well, interestingly, neither of these philosophies cares much about the author, but for totally different reasons. Structuralists say the author is largely irrelevant because it's the overarching system of language and culture that truly matters. The author is just a vessel. Post-structuralists, however, take it a massive step further. They remove the author entirely to transfer the power directly to you, the reader. And this brings us to one of the most famous declarations in literary theory from philosopher Roland Barthes. He simply said, "The author is dead." Now don't worry, it's not a true crime mystery. By declaring the author dead, Barthes is simply arguing that the original intent of the creator no longer dictates what a text means. Once a piece of art is out in the world, the author loses all control of it. This striking concept transfers the ultimate power of interpretation completely to the consumer. You decide what it means through your own unique, entirely subjective lens.
Okay, section 4, dismantling the binaries. Let's talk about opposites and hierarchy.
So, how do these philosophies actually go about organizing our reality? Well, structuralists rely really heavily on binaries. We're talking about opposites like light and dark, good and evil, male and female. They use these to organize meaning systematically, treating them almost like neutral gears turning the great machine of culture. Derrida and the post-structuralists, on the other hand, they look at those exact same binaries and expose them as power structures. Derrida pointed out that binaries are never actually neutral. They are always hierarchical. One term is always privileged, and it always suppresses the other. Light is favored over dark, good suppresses evil. So they aren't just organizational tools, they are literal instruments of dominance.
Okay, so if binaries are dismantled and meaning is always sliding away and the author is dead, we really have to ask ourselves, what happens when the center cannot hold? What actually happens when the foundation of everything you thought you knew starts to crack?
The resulting philosophical earthquake here is profound. Structuralism insists that deep structures are real, they are discoverable, and they represent universal truths about the human condition. Post-structuralism reveals that every single structure has an unstable center. What structuralists saw as universal, unbreakable truths, post-structuralists exposed as mere constructs built on shifting sand. They aren't truths at all. They are just inventions we've collectively agreed upon to make the world feel a little less terrifying.
And that leads us to our final section, section 5, the end of certainty, embracing the chaos.
This ultimate shift completely changes our role as critics and as consumers of information. A structuralist critic acts almost like a scientist. Their job is to map and decode the underlying system objectively. They are looking for the formula. But post-structuralism argues that no objective reading exists at all. Every single interpretation you make is itself just another text, filled with its own gaps, its own biases, and its own contradictions. You aren't solving a puzzle, you're really just adding more pieces to a chaotic pile. So across the board, we see this radical transition from order to instability. We go from meaning being stable to endlessly sliding, from signs anchored by convention to a dizzying hall of mirrors, from the author being just a vessel for the system to being declared dead so the reader can take all the power, from structures being undeniably real to completely constructed, from binaries acting as neutral organizers to oppressive hierarchies, and from language acting as a closed system to one full of absences and contradictions. Where structuralism sought a perfect universal formula, post-structuralism proved that the math simply doesn't add up. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to ponder the next time you read a book, or watch the news, or analyze any cultural event. Are you looking for the underlying system, or are you embracing the chaos? Are you a builder of structures, or a dismantler of them? Keep questioning everything, and thank you so much for joining me today on The Explainer. Catch you next time.